Peace, beautiful people. It's Letitia with Piece of Food, and today I'm going to discuss Octavia E. Butler. I'm going to first start out with telling you a little bit about her, why I love her, some of her work, why she's important, and then I'll just go from there and see what other things pop up in my mind. So I'll start off by saying who she is. She is the first female Black science fiction author. So she's a writer. She's one of my all-time favorite authors, and I'll tell you a little bit why. So Octavia was born in Pasadena, California, and unfortunately she passed away at the age of 58. There's some conflicting information about how she passed away, but what I've read is that she fell and had a head injury, but then other reports say that she had a stroke. So anyway, she has now transitioned out of this world, and she has left some amazing work that relates directly to what's going on right now with this pandemic and all of the injustices that are going on around the world. And I'll touch on that. So the reason why I love her so much is that I've always been into sci-fi. I've loved seeing things that were so-called unimaginable, or I loved anything dealing with outer space and things like that. So she's one of the main reasons why I got into loving science fiction. Her stories are very captivating, and she was highly into manifesting. I'm going to put up some of her writings, her own personal writings, how she would write down like, I'm going to be the best, the top selling author, I'm going to be this, or I'm going to be that. So she believed in herself. She did struggle with some depression at times, but she really did believe that she was going to become like this amazing science fiction author. And I can't imagine doing that, especially when there was no one that looked like her in these books and in these movies. So that was one of the reasons that she got started writing science fiction, is because she loved sci-fi, but she didn't see herself in these futuristic movies, in these futuristic books. So, what does that look like for a Black person not seeing themselves written into the future? That means a lot. That has an effect on how maybe you think about yourself. So if you are someone who is really into sci-fi, like, I highly recommend you look into Octavia Butler. So she started writing when she was really young, but her main bodies of work came from the 70s up into the early 2000s. So another main reason why I just love her is that I can see myself in some of her stories. A lot of these other stories, and not to like downplay other sci-fi authors, but they don't write in people who look like me. They write in people who look like them. So, you know, if this field is white male dominated, then that's who's gonna dominate these stories. So again, she needed to have us in these stories. Another main reason why I really love her work is because most of her stories are very related to social justice, and social justice in general is science fiction. Dream Hampton has this amazing quote. I'll read it at the end, but it is social justice, activism, it's all science fiction because it's all something we have to make up in our head or try to make up to think like, oh my God, we live in a world without racism. That's science fiction. Majority of her work has the main characters always looking for a solution and not really just sitting there and letting things happen around them. They wanted to accomplish something and they did it. It didn't work sometimes, but they tried. They came up with solutions. They came up with things to help their communities and things like that. So that's another reason why her books really resonate with me. majority of her characters are women, and they are Black women. So this was something that I loved, and they weren't stories that weren't, some of her books weren't as far-fetched as like, oh my God, this could happen. That's why this book really stands out to me, and it really stuck in my head, and especially now with what's going on. Next, I'll talk a little bit about how she influenced just people around her, other authors, other writers, people in the social justice realm. She's influenced countless people. So some of those books I'll mention, or I'll just point out here. Octavia's Brood is a huge one that I really loved. Shout out to Adrienne Marie Brown. Let me read that quote to you actually right now, since I have this in my hand, the Dream Hampton quote. So this book is all about connecting science fiction to social justice movements, and it's a collection of short stories that were inspired by Octavia Butler that are really cool. And I should have put a little bookmark. Okay, I'll read you a little excerpt from Dream Hampton's quote. And Dream Hampton is a filmmaker. And yeah, so all social justice work is science fiction. We are imagining a world free of injustice, a world that doesn't yet exist. So that is very powerful to think about, because sometimes when we think about activism and social justice, we think about, let's just say right now, we'll relate this to right now. We just think about, okay, protesting and being on the front line and things like that. However, there are other ways to protest. You can protest by withholding your money. You can protest by starting a business within your community, and or starting like a community-based business with other people within your community, or helping with homeschooling of other children in your community. So social justice looks like a lot of different things. Social justice can be growing your own food, can be collecting rainwater, it can be living off of the grid. It can be all these different things. It's all revolutionary acts, so it can mean different things to different people. So it's amazing how many people Octavia has influenced, like just the amount of authors in here who had the chance to share their short stories about social justice and things like that. Another book, let me just pull these out. Another one is The Strange Matings. And this is Science Fiction, Feminism, African American Voices, and Octavia Butler. So this is, again, is another, what do you call it? Not a compilation. Also, 2 of her books were made into graphic novels. So Kindred and Parable of the Sower. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about her work, all of her writings, all of her books, and then I'll talk to you a little bit about a couple of my favorites. So she has a lot. Crossover, Child Finder, Pattern Master, Mind of My Mind, Survivor, Kindred, which is, I feel like that's one of her most popular, more so than this one. Kindred is a book about an African-American woman married to a white man in the 70s, I want to say. And yeah, because she wrote this in 79. So African-American woman, white male, and time travel. So Dana is time traveling back to when slavery still existed. So it's a very, 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 very interesting, I don't know, it's just so captivating, because this is the #1 book that I recommend to people to start with, even though that wasn't her first one, and it's not my absolute favorite book. I love it, but it is just so interesting to think about, like, what if you were transported back into time? Or what if you do believe in past lives, what if that is something that existed in your past life somehow? So I don't know, my brain just gets going, but Kindred is one of them, Near of Kin, Wild Seed, which is another one of my favorites, Speech Sounds, Clay's Arc, I love that one, Bloodchild, Dawn, The Evening, In the Morning, Adulthood Rights, Imago, Parable of the Sower, and then she had the collection of her short stories, Parable of the Talents, Amnesty, The Book of Martha, and then Fledgling. Fledgling is this one here, which I love that one so much. I always reread that one. That one is a vampire book, and it's really cool. But anyway, those are her works, and she has so many other works that I hope to discover. There's one book that I need to get my hands on it. I'm going to get it before the end of 2020. It's called Survivor. It's out of print. It's her least favorite book, and I don't care if it's her least favorite book. I want it for my collection, so I'm gonna get it. It goes for, the price is pretty high right now. It's up to like $1,000 or $2,000, but I'm gonna get it. So anyway, moving on, some of my favorites, like I said, I already discussed the Parable of the Sower. Love that one. Wild Seed. So she has, if you've been following her, you know that a lot of her book covers have changed over the years, which is pretty fascinating. I was reading up on her book covers because back in the day, some of her book covers did not contain what the character looked like. It didn't have a black person on the cover, and a lot of her updated versions or re-released books started to have those. Now, not all of those back in the day. There was only a couple that had like a white person on there or something like that, even though the character was black. That just goes to show you there was a lot of racism in publishing companies too, or whoever was handling that, but that's another story. So anyway, what was I talking about? Wild Seed. So Wild Seed is one of my absolute favorites. I think it's my number one out of her books. So Wild Seed, it is about the main character, her name is Anyanwu, and the other main character's name is Doro, and they're both basically these infinite beings who have all this power, have all this control, control on Earth. They breed all these different lineages and all these different families with all these different types of superpowers. And please read it. And they have this love-hate relationship that is just really interesting. I know I use that word a lot, but it's a great, great book, and it's part of a series. So if you're into reading series, I definitely would advise you to look into Seed to Harvest. So Seed to Harvest is actually the 4 books in one, basically. So Wild Seed, Mind of My Mind, Clay's Arc, and Pattern Master. You can also find those books individually, but if you wanted to have them all in this one big ass book, let me see how many pages it is. It's probably like almost 800 pages. Yeah, but anyways, if you wanted to do that, you could. I love reading series. So that's one of them, Seed to Harvest. But Wild Seed is my favorite. I just connected so much with the main character because she was a shapeshifter, and that's just cool to me. I want to be a shapeshifter. I guess we are all shapeshifters in different ways. But that's getting a little too deep. So let's see if I left anything out. I'm gonna talk a little bit about, I think I kind of went over all of like the main points. If you have any questions, please comment. Let me know if you've read any of her books. Let me know if you liked them, hated them. I highly doubt you hate them. If you do, well, you just hate it and you can get off my post. No. I'm joking. So anyway, some of my favorite quotes from her. My number one thing, and I have it hanging up in my house, is all that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. And that is so true. It's just like, wow. And that can be in a good way, and that can be in a so-called negative way, you know? So all that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. Another great quote is, I began writing about power because I had so little. So that was directly from Butler. The quote about change is from Parable of the Sower. So that character in the book said that, but it's Butler's writing. Another great quote I love is, to survive, know the past, let it touch you, then let the past go. And that comes from Parable of the Talents, that book. So that's number 2 in the book number 2 in this grouping. So Parable of the Sower goes with Parable of the Talents. Another group of, why am I saying group of books? Series. Another series is called Lilith's Brood, and again, you can buy these books individually. I think there's 3 books in here. Yes, 3 books in one, all in here in another series that she has. So you can do the same, get this book so you can read all 3 together, or you can get them individually. I had most of her books individually, but then when I got these, or wherever the other one is, I gave away all the individual books, which I wish I kept them because they were older copies. But this was before I had my like obsession with her. So anyway, I hope people enjoyed them. So something I read this past week made me a little sad, but apparently she was working on releasing 4 more books in the Parable series. So she was going to release Parable of the Trickster, Parable of the Teacher, Parable of Chaos, Parable of Clay, and unfortunately that never happened, so it's okay. You know, she wrote that it was becoming very depressing and overwhelming for her to write that, because when you read these, you'll see, you know, I say I can relate a lot of things in here to the time right now, to 2020. However, times were really rough in this book. It was like the end of life as they knew it. Like literally all the systems went down, like nothing was in place. So you had to fend for yourself. You had to figure out what was going to happen. It was like literally the end of the world was happening. So I can understand that maybe writing the story was depressing for her because of where the world was headed, or where the other worlds were headed. Because another thing I didn't mention is within the Parable of the Sower, when Lauren was making up her own religion, she really wanted to expand to other worlds, so not just Earth. She thought, we have to go somewhere else. Like, it's crazy out here in these streets. So it definitely went further, and I don't know where Octavia Butler's mind was. I did read that as she got closer to her death, she was kind of depressed. So that was probably, I am gonna speculate. Maybe it was directly related to her writer's block. She did have a period where she had writer's block, so it's probably directly related. However, I am so grateful for all of the works that I have from her that I was able to read and understand and really relate to parts of myself and parts of the outer world. She is a major person that I think most curriculums, forget curriculums, most homes should have. So if you're homeschooling your child, or if your child is into sci-fi, definitely have them read some of her works, because it's important to see ourselves in the future. Like, Afrofuturism is powerful. There's nothing else to say. It's powerful because we see ourselves in the future. You know, we want to see ourselves in the future. We have to write ourselves into the future. We have to think ourselves into the future. We have to put things in place to keep our bloodline or our lineage or whatever going. So I think it's very important that you plant seeds of activism, plant seeds of social justice, plant seeds of, I don't know, just self-love into yourself, into your family, into your children. So I think reading some of these works will help connect a lot of the dots, and that's what it's all about, really connecting the dots, because in most of her books there was always that group who thought they were better than everyone else and that treated this group so poorly. Whether they were aliens, whether they were vampires, whether they were humans, there was always that like, oh, I'm better than you, so I'm gonna put you into slavery, I'm gonna put you into whatever, I'm gonna move you out of your neighborhoods. So it's super important to realize and to connect the dots with everything. It's all connected and it all matters, and I think she knew that. Like, she was way ahead of her time. No pun intended, because she talked a lot about the future, but she was way ahead of her time just on a lot of things. She grew up during the Jim Crow era, so I mean, she knew what was going on, and still she stood up and wrote about us and won awards with her book, with her writing, and just kept going. Like, that was a time when there were no other Black women.